much for joining me on Being Indispensable. My name's Liz Van Vliet. We're all dispensable. I know that better than anyone. I'm a breast cancer survivor. But that doesn't mean that we can't invest in ourselves to improve the skills and capabilities that are going to help us stand out and be perceived as indispensable. Being indispensable is also about the being side of the equation. Because if we're not looking after ourselves and our own well-being, then we have no hope of showing up as indispensable in the workplace. Well, hello, my lovely listener. It's Liz here, bringing you another solo episode. So we're going for the hat trick at the start of 2024. I'm doing solo episode after solo episode after solo episode. And that is because I think it's really important to be that podcast in the admin professional space that I have been over the years. And that is one that brings you both interviews so that you can hear these nuggets of gold from the people that I invite to be on the podcast, but also to be able to continue to bring you my own nuggets of gold, what I hope are nuggets of gold, by doing these solo episodes. So I am kicking off February with a solo episode, and this month is the theme of my month of February is all about the second pillar, if you will, of my linchpin model. And that is the pillar of the insight and impact zone of leader, the leader, your leader. Now, let me tell you why that's so important and what I'm going to focus on in today's episode. So, are you someone who can relate to the struggle to keep your boss on task? Are you someone that can relate to the struggle of feeling like you are second guessing your manager? Or are you somebody that struggles with how often and when to communicate with your leader, with your executive? Are you someone that might feel that they can relate to the struggle of breaking down those barriers to really get to know the person or people that you're supporting? Or are you someone who can relate to feeling like you're dealing with a manager who you don't feel is leveraging you, who may not value your skills or see your potential? So all of those challenges are the reason why they are the challenges that I unfortunately see in assistants that really sap your morale and confidence when you're dealing with them. It's tough because you, despite those being challenges that you might be facing, you have to keep showing up and putting yourself out there, even when you might feel that your relationship with your manager isn't as deep or as harmonious as you'd like, that you don't feel like you're on the same page as them all the time or even at all. For me, what I find though is that the reality is that the success of the EA and executive leader partnership is so fundamental to you being successful as an individual, to you being efficient and effective, which you know is something that I talk a lot about, and to you being seen as a talent, not just a resource, as my friend Rachel Benetti talks about. It's why in my training and coaching, I focus so much on these supercharged soft skills that I call your power skills that enable you to build this important relationship. And that's, it's a pillar, it's an impact and insight zone that I focus on because it is so important, this relationship with your executive. So, I'm a big fan, as you know, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you'll know I'm a huge fan of Stephen Covey, bit of a fangirl. And I love the quote in his book where he talks about seeking first to understand. And it's why in my 10 power skills that I focus on, there is managing up skillfully is one of them, and fostering curiosity for insights is another one, because both of these are critical to your success. So in today's episode, I'm going to give you some insight into some thought leadership on the topic of managing up. And it's managing up to your exec, to your leader, because managing up, we can manage up, we can manage diagonally, we can manage, horizontally. There's, I call it managing the matrix. But in today's episode, I'm really focusing on managing up, managing your manager. So it's going to be a bit of a book review episode in terms of what I'm sharing, because all of the ideas, there's 3 key ideas that I'm going to share in today's episode, and they all come from a book that I am a big fan of called Managing Up by a lady called Mary Aberjay. So Mary Aberjay is an author. She's a speaker and a management consultant. The link to the book will be in the episode description, the show notes. She's also the president of a leadership development consultancy called the Cornerstone Group, and she helps organizations foster the skills, strategies, and workplace culture required for 21st century success, is what it says in her bio. So I'm going to share with you these 3 nuggets from this book, and I really hope that they resonate with you in terms of the person or the people that you support. I really hope that these concepts give you pause to reflect on that person or people so that you can get some more insight in order to have more impact with that person and on behalf of that person. So, the first concept that Mary talks about that I love is noticing and observing and putting into action that introverted and extroverted bosses, managers, leaders require different communication styles. So she says, what she talks about in the book is that it's a no-brainer. When you want to build interpersonal relationships with people, including your manager, it's important to understand what makes them tick. Yep, she's singing from my hymn book. How do they tend to communicate, and where do they get their energy from? Because that's actually what's at the heart of introversion versus extroversion, where they get their energy from. So these aspects of personality are usually determined by a person's level of extroversion. So, first question to ask yourself is your boss, is your manager an outie, that is an extrovert, or is she or he or they an innie or an introvert? And I love that she uses that outie and an innie, because I think of that as what we use to describe our belly buttons. So it made me giggle when I read that that's the way she describes people who are either introverted or extroverted. They're either innies or they're outies. So how do you answer that? Well, you do that thing, which I've mentioned. You notice and observe. You get curious. You look at how your boss behaves. An innie boss will often focus on their own thoughts and ideas. So that might look like not sharing much information with you and only giving their opinion when you ask for it. So this sort of leader, this sort of manager doesn't interact much with colleagues, outside of what they're required to do, and they tend to reflect on decisions before making them, which can also mean that they can be slow to respond to people's queries. In contrast, a typical outie manager, according to Mary, focuses on the external world of people and their relationships with them. So if your manager is a she will happily share her knowledge with you. In fact, she may even give you too much information sometimes. You'll usually know what she's thinking because she'll readily tell you. And her friendly attitude will shine through during her regular interactions with staff, Mary says. Now, there's nothing wrong per se with being either, an innie or an outie. We all know that, whether you're a manager or whether you're an individual contributor. But the problem arises where there is a problem. It usually arises where there's a mismatch between your level of extroversion and your managers. So she talks about some strategies for managing up if you have an introverted boss. So if, for example, you're an outie working for an innie, she says you may want more interaction and advice than that person would normally tend to give. So in this situation, it's all about being proactive, making sure that you have those one-on-one time blocks, making it your mission to initiate meetings instead of waiting for her to do so. We're assuming that she's talking, this is a female leader. When you do get that precious time with your innie boss, try not to be too chatty, she suggests, because you'll get a better response if you keep your interactions tightly focused on the task at hand. Now, in contrast, if you're a stressed introvert, innie, who feels drained by your outie boss's constant communication, there's also ways of managing up for that situation. And her suggestion is that, first of all, extroverts need to feel that they're being heard. So listening, nodding, and showing interest while your manager speaks at length can be a great strategy. Second thing she suggests is getting comfortable with offering your opinion, which is going to mean stretching yourself, even if you have doubts about what you're saying. Extroverts don't mind if you think out loud. They will welcome open communication. So at the end of the day, the bottom line in her book with this idea of really noticing and adapting to whether you're an introvert, an innie, an outie, respectively, it's about adapting, managing up both, from whatever perspective you're coming from and, really adapting your communication style. Now, the second differential that she encourages you to reflect on in the book is this idea of whether your boss, your manager, is a harmonizer or an advancer, is the way she describes it. So people will often say that we should behave towards others as we would like them to behave towards us. But what if we're so different from one another that what we actually want is to be treated differently? So I'm a huge fan of a quote, which actually does not come from Mary Aberjay, but it comes from somebody else on this topic of managing up, that talks about managing up is about managing somebody the way they want to be managed, not the way you want to be managed. So Mary says that to get along with your manager, you need to, again, notice and observe her workplace personality, their workplace personality, and treat them accordingly. And in any workplace, there are several distinct personality types. And two key ones are this one called the advancer and another one called the harmonizer. So the advancer is obsessed with getting results. That person is highly goal-oriented and less interested in building friendly relationships, with their colleagues. That person is seen as confident, efficient, and pragmatic, but can also be seen as cold, demanding, and dominating. So if we're thinking of them in terms of the DISC profile, they're going to be high Ds, direct people. So in contrast, she then says there's the harmonizer, who cares less about results and more about making the workplace a great place to be. Their focus isn't so much on achieving goals as it is on ensuring their colleagues are happy and in sync with one another. So while the harmonizers' workmates see them as kind and cooperative, they may also see that person as maybe weak or too relaxed around the office. So that's another thing for you to be noticing in your manager. Once you recognize either those harmonizing or advancing traits, then you can adjust and adapt your behavior to better manage your relationship with them. So if we're talking about advances, for example, they are highly solution focused and they're not interested in apologizing over things that go awry. They want things solved fast. So with this in mind, when you approach your advancer manager with a problem, that's when it's really important that you come to them with a potential solution in mind. Better yet, have several solutions so they have options. Also, just remember that somebody that's an advancer doesn't have much time for complaints. They want to hear proposals. So she talks about, instead of complaining to an advancer about, say, she gives the example of a disorganized IT system. She says, request permission to reorganize that system yourself. So, we're probably all rolling our eyes now going, oh, great, Liz. Now you're telling me that I've got to just delegate work to myself. It's about solutions. That's the key thing. A harmonizer boss, a harmonizer manager, by contrast, has their mind on harmony and cohesion. So if a conflict arises between, say, you and someone else, they're not the person for you to take it to. They don't want to get involved in interpersonal conflict. And I know you, my lovely listener, you are not going to be, going whinging or moaning to your manager as a general rule. But it's just worth knowing how triggering that can be for somebody that is a harmonizer as well. So it's all about trying to resolve your issues with your colleagues directly. And that brings in to play another one of my power skills, which is, mastering confident communication and, being able to have a difficult conversation. So just to finish that off, this idea of, if you do have somebody that's more of a harmonizer leader, trying to focus on the team as a whole, being mindful that that is something that is really important for you to support them in. So That's an opportunity for you to really add value if that's the type of manager that you have, a harmonizer boss, doing things that are going to help with the team dynamic. Now, the final nugget that I'm sharing from you from the book is her tips for dealing with a micromanager, because I know that there's those of you out there that might have a micromanager in your world, and it may not be your leader, it might be somebody else in your environment. So Mary advocates that in order to build better relationships with managers, leaders, you need to focus on gaining their trust. So trust is the key lever with a micromanager. So if you've got a boss that is constantly looking over your shoulder, metaphorically or physically, wanting to know what you're doing, where you're up to, they explain things in minute detail, how to do a task, even when you know more about it than they do. It's their way or the highway. If any of those situations sound familiar, then you may have a micromanager. So they can be extremely frustrating to have, because not only do we as human beings have an intrinsic need for autonomy, and independence, but from a career perspective, micromanager bosses can really stifle your potential for professional growth. So, how does Mary suggest you manage this relationship? First tip she gives is to understand that many micromanagers are acting from a place of fear. Deep down, these sort of execs feel inadequate or insecure. They constantly worry about making mistakes and failing. That's the story they're telling themselves. Unfortunately, the way they deal with these feelings is by over-controlling the people in their orbit. And micromanaging others actually makes them feel powerful. So it's a way of allaying their insecurities. So the key thing, Mary says, is to win their trust. So given that that person, doesn't trust you nor your ability to do a good job straight out of the gate, you're going to be putting them at ease by showing them that you are dependable, that you are reliable, that you are somebody that consistently performs well. And although this might mean that you have to work harder in the short term, it's so crucial to prove to these micromanagers that you can reliably meet expectations and you can exercise good judgment. So they need to have faith that they need to have faith in you, and you need to have faith that if you routinely deliver results from your side of the equation, then you're going to be raising your currency in their minds, and that fear will abate in them, and that, hopefully trust will eventually bloom like a beautiful rose. So the other tip is communicate with the micromanager. Over-communicate. Communicate a lot. This type of exec often appreciates knowing every detail of, your working day and the tasks that you're delivering. With this in mind, that's where sending somebody like that some sort of daily memo, daily bulleted list can be helpful. So, even just, taking a screenshot of your to-do list to demonstrate to them what you've knocked off your to-do list is going to reinforce that trust and confidence. So, this might sound like information overload, and it is if your boss is not a micromanager. If they are a micromanager, you will be giving them what they need. So, final thing that I want to remind you of is that you have an enormous back catalogue of episodes in the vault of Assist with Impact, previously being indispensable, and I can point you straight away to episode 57, and I'll put a link in the episode description to another episode I did on managing up. So, as I said, the month of February will be all about the leader insights and impact zone in my linchpin, what I call my linchpin model. So make sure you're following me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I love being hit up with connections from admin professionals, and follow me on Instagram at _linchpin_assistant. And make sure you're subscribed to my email list so that you don't miss out on more strategies during the month of February to support you to deepen your insight and expand your impact in this particular zone of leader. So that is all I've got for you today. I absolutely hope that your 2024 continues to move along at a lovely pace, and I will look forward to bringing you another episode in a couple of weeks' time, which will also be on this topic of the leader insight and impact zone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.